Well, I'm David Elwood, and academic dean here at the Kennedy School, and we're in for a real treat tonight. Our speaker tonight is J. Robert Carey, who's the junior senator from Nebraska. He's the vice chair of the Committee on Intelligence in the Senate, an interesting title, Agriculture Committee, and now, and most appropriately for tonight's talk, he's a member of the Finance Committee. Frankly, as someone who dealt a lot with the Finance Committee a few years back, I wish he was there then. He's also previously, well, a rare animal. He had been governor of the state of Nebraska as a Democrat, where he took a deficit and converted it into a surplus, something that needs to be done at many levels of government. But one of the most interesting and important features about the senator is his remarkable service as part of the Navy SEAL team, where he served in Vietnam and ultimately earned the Congressional Medal of Honor. Now, the topic on which he's to speak today is something that few congressmen are given medals of honor for working on. But indeed, it will take all the courage one can muster to take on the crises in our various entitlement programs. When I first had to start dealing with this issue, I was working in the Department of Health and Human Services. And I, in my role there, was the person who served the secretary and provided information for her when she was going to be on the Social Security advisory board, basically. And it was the first time I'd ever seen the number $1 trillion. And so I actually wrote it out. And do it sometime. It's pretty impressive. And the only problem with the trillion was it was more than one, it was 6. And unfortunately, it was how much we were unfunded. $6 trillion in unfunded liability. Well, Senator Carey was in, and by the way, the reaction to that at that time is that health reform will solve this problem, which I thought, well, that's pretty good, $6 trillion, that health reform is going to work out real well. Health reform didn't work out real well. And in 1994, the senator was placed in charge of a really co-chairman of the Bipartisan Commission on Entitlement and Tax Reform. And the committee's findings in its final report have been something that has gotten an enormous amount of attention and praise for its thoughtfulness and its depth and its set of ideas. We have before us a man who really does say it like it is, and I think also is taking the lead in one of the hardest issues that this nation has to face, and in a variety of dimensions, but especially entitlements. So please join me in welcoming Senator Bob Carey.
Well, after the Sunday New York Times Magazine, I thought maybe I would sit in the audience and introduce you, and you could talk to us about all this stuff. Let me say, first of all, that I have a specific proposal that I will not talk about this evening, lest anybody think that all I have is generality. Senator Simpson and I introduced legislation 2 years ago, and again last year. He's gone, but we will reintroduce it. So anyone who has an interest in in my ideas about what specifically ought to be done, I'd be pleased to share those with you, or debate those with you, or listen to your suggestions about them at some other point, or perhaps in the Q&A to do that as well. Secondly, let me say that I believe that the issue of entitlements is very often one where there's a presumption that you have to get into intergenerational battles in order to argue them effectively. And I would urge you to sincerely understand that that's not my purpose. I think there is very, very strong support for the 2 biggest entitlement programs. Indeed, in the old days, one could talk about entitlements, and then the audience would say, somebody in the audience would say, well, what should be done? You could say we should cut the farm program, we should cut entitlements for the poor. Well, we ended the farm program, and we ended AFDC, so now all we're talking about is Social Security and Medicare. So we kind of cut through the jargon here. You can no longer point to farm program and get off the hook in Massachusetts, or point to AFDC and get off the hook in some conservative congressional district. You're left now with 2 very large and very, very effective middle-class entitlement programs, Social Security and Medicare. There's a story told by one of my favorite public servants that illustrates the importance of entering this argument respectfully and not provoking and unnecessary, not just argument, but a degree of intensity that causes one person to actually feel strong hatred towards the other because of their views. Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan and I were having dinner about a month ago, and I asked him what was it like to be in that ticker tape parade when the Yankees won. I hate to say that here in Boston, but the Yankees won in the World Series, and so there came a moment when Moynihan got to go to this ticker tape parade and be with all the players, and I asked him, wasn't that a big thrill? And he says, yes, it was a big thrill for me because I was there with Joe DiMaggio. Joe DiMaggio, he said, was a man that I had saw play baseball in 1936. I believe it was 36. Those who know baseball better than I may correct my dates later, but he said I was given 60 cents by my mother, and he, as only Senator Moynihan can, described the details of how it took 20 cents to take the mass transit, and 60 cents covered the whole thing, and he goes to the game. His idol was Lou Gehrig. He loved Lou Gehrig. He was not just a fan. Gehrig to him was everything that he wanted to be. Well, that particular game, Gehrig was hitless, and Joe DiMaggio hit a home run. He was a rookie, and for me to be sitting with a guy talking about going to a game where both Gehrig and DiMaggio was playing, it was quite a thrill. But he goes on to say that I went home and told my mother I was quite upset with DiMaggio for having done that. So she gave me 60 cents again, and he goes through the whole, took the mass transit, and got to the game and saw the game again, and the same thing happened. Gehrig went hitless, and DiMaggio hit a home run. He said, on that summer day in July of 1936, I hated Joe DiMaggio. So he said, some 40 years later, he was the ambassador to the United Nations in New York City, eating, and he gave me the details, which I don't remember. I was in a restaurant, 23rd East, 82nd or something. It was 11 o'clock at night, and in the restaurant with a pal, as I was finishing my meal, walks Joe DiMaggio. He said, imagine my surprise. 40 years later, I've been in World War II, I've been in the Nixon White House, I've done all these things, I've been at Harvard, all these wonderful things that he'd done in his lifetime. Imagine my surprise, there I am now, the ambassador of the United Nations, and the hatred came back into my heart. He said, my hands started trembling, and my chest was heaving, and it was really awful. And DiMaggio sat down and recognized me, nodded, and smiled. He said, I paid the bill, and I walked out onto the street there in the evening, 11 o'clock at night on the 23rd of July, 23 East, 82nd, or whatever the heck it was. And I, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, ambassador of the United Nations, forgave Joe DiMaggio. Well, all this is to say, this story is to say these disagreements can produce hatreds and a lot more than we need in order to solve the problem. Let me stipulate a couple things up front. The two big entitlement programs, Medicare and Social Security, have worked. The marketplace did not reduce the rate of uninsured Americans over the age of 65 from 50% to zero. A federal law did that. Now, it is absolutely true and important for us to recognize that the strength of that market's ability to produce goods and services determines how much bills we can pay. We have to have a vibrant and strong economy, and we do have a vibrant and strong economy, in order to be able to pay for anything, whether it's health care or education or transportation or whatever it is. So the two are connected. But in 1965, 50% of people over the age of 65 were uninsured. In 1966, that number was zero. The market didn't do it. A federal law did it, reduced the rates of uninsured from 50 to zero. I say that I stipulated that at the beginning because one of the things that I've learned in politics is it doesn't do me much good to try to reach agreement with somebody with whom I'm going to disagree anyway. So if your view is that the market can get this thing done, fine, let's talk, let's have a beer, let's have a hamburger, whatever you want to do, but we're not going to agree on Medicare. Secondly, it's important for me to say that because from 1995 to 1996, another 1.5 million Americans went from insured to uninsured. It would have been close to 2.5 million, except state and local government picked up about 1 million. So the market isn't working for a lot of people out there who are working today, who are in the workplace, they're doing the right thing, blah, 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 whatever you want them to do. They got a job, they're not insured. Maybe that wasn't a big deal 30 years ago, 20 years ago, wherever your frame of reference is. My favorite frame of reference is I have a 22-year-old son who was born in November of 1974. I paid cash for it. It didn't have to be insured in 1974 against the cost of a baby. Today, the cost of a baby can be a traumatic expenditure. It's one of the reasons why there's been a great debate about, am I going to stay in the hospital a day? Is it going to be like drive-through at McDonald's? What's the deal here in order to reduce the cost or shortening the stay? And one of the reasons is that technology and other sorts of things have increased the cost. Salaries have gone up. Whatever the reason you want to cite, it's more expensive to have a baby today, let alone a baby that might require some additional care. So the cost of care has gone up, and it's a big problem if you're uninsured. It's a big problem if you're 20, just as it can be a big problem if you're 70. It's a bigger problem when you're 70 only because your income has tended to be down and your cost of health care has gone up substantially. I've made these presentations before, and I had a young person stand up and say, why not, just let us all build up our own trust funds, blah, 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 we'll just pay the bills ourselves. And he said, he gave me, I don't know, he said, you're 30 years old, you wait, another 25, 30 years, and then come back and talk to me, and that's about the time your genetic code says it's time to get sick. And it's going to be expensive if you do. It's time you're going to start to have some problems, and it's going to be expensive no matter what you try to do with it. So I stipulate that the program has worked, and I also stipulate the program was an intervention in the marketplace. It was an intervention in the marketplace because we saw the market wasn't working, and it isn't working right now for lots of people out there who continue to face the problem of insurance. Thus, I would argue that we ought to solve the problem of that entitlement program, Medicare, not only to be able to fix the budget problem, but to increase the number of people who are insured in the United States of America. Use the example of Medicare success to try to achieve success in some other area. My favorite happens to be prosthetic devices. I'm amputee myself from the war in Vietnam. The market doesn't do that deal, folks. I'm a businessman. I love what the market can do, but I get my limbs to the VA. I understand people like to make fun of the VA, blah, 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 but it works for me. It costs $1 billion for all arms and legs in America. That's about half what we spend on dog food. It seems to me that we ought to be able to at least do that. So one of the things that I intend to do in this next Congress is say to my good conservative friends, look, we've socialized kidneys. We cover all kidneys in America. We've got one organ in it. I just want to add limbs. It's fairly inexpensive. I've got young kids out there through cancer, through trauma, who are beg, borrowing, and stealing, doing all sorts of things to be able to live a healthy life. Why not use the example of kidney dialysis and use the example of people like me to give them a fair shot in their lifetime. Likewise with Social Security. Social Security, I don't want to drive this one too far off the edge, but it has been enormously beneficial. And it's very important, particularly for people over the age of 65, to acknowledge it. One of the reasons it's been successful is we changed the program. It used to be a program where we provided a very, very small payment to keep people out of the poorhouse. That's basically all it was. And the promise to pay started 6 years after normal life expectancy, when that program was written in 1935. It has been changed since Richard Nixon and Wilbur Mills got in their great battles in the early 1970s over what the annual increase was going to be. Mills ran through a 20% increase in Social Security payments, thinking that Nixon would veto it, and then he would campaign against him in 1972. Nixon signed it. And he did the same thing the next year. Then COLAs came in after that. COLAs were not a part of the 1935 program. They were added only as a defensive measure because Congress didn't have any self-discipline. Those COLAs have changed the program from a relatively small payment to one that really has dramatically had an impact on the rates of poverty over the age of 65. So Social Security now must be seen as a success, not just because it's kept people out of the poorhouse, but because it's dramatically reduced the number of Americans over the age of 65. Again, no matter what you do, it's likely to be that your income is going to drop off over the age of 65, particularly in this cutthroat climate that we live in today, where people are getting laid off at age 50 and then hired back as contract workers. I mean, there isn't a lot of loyalty out there to an employee anymore, and it seems to me that one has to acknowledge that this program has done a lot more than just provided a little bit of retirement income for a growing number of Americans. It's their only source of income during those periods of time when they're not likely to be able to earn very much money. Now, having stipulated that I like the programs, having stipulated that I would change the programs, bearing in mind that they were successful in helping Americans, having done that, let me identify three big future problems. Social Security is not in crisis. It's not going broke tomorrow. Medicare is not in crisis. It's not going broke tomorrow. But both of them have, I think, three problems long term. And by the way, the sooner you get after them, the easier it's going to be. And the people that ought to be most concerned about it are my kids, the children of either the baby boomers or slightly older than the baby boom generation. Current beneficiaries who typically get very concerned about what's going to happen to current beneficiaries are not likely to suffer any decrease in program benefits. It is the future beneficiaries that have the biggest problem. And the sooner you get after the solution, the easier it's going to be to solve the problem. Very, very easy to say, very difficult to do in democracy. Democracy, we typically like to wait until there's a crisis, then we act. This is a long-term problem. When you're trying to save money for health care and retirement, the sooner you start, the more likely it is that you're going to be able to take advantage of compounding interest rates and save up the money. Three problems are the following. Number one, I've got a promise on the table I can't keep all beneficiaries. Understand that there are eligible beneficiaries and people who will be eligible, beneficiaries who will be eligible in the future. Every beneficiary of Social Security and Medicare up to the year 2050 is alive today. Is alive today. I can keep the promise up until about the year 2001 or so for Medicare. I can keep the promise up to about year 2027 or 8 or 9 for Social Security. And for those that say, well, that's real simple, Carey, all you got to do is, raise taxes, cut benefits, and so forth. It's not going to be any easier in 2029 than it is today. The problem is that you're going to have to go deeper the longer you have to wait. Or you're going to have to raise the rate of taxation higher. The longer you wait, the more draconian and difficult the solution is. So I've got a promise on the table that I got to honestly say I'm not going to be able to keep it. And if you ask Shirley Chater, the head of the Social Security Administration now, what's going to happen to all those folks? She said, well, probably going to have to cut their benefits. So I've got people in America who are under the age of 40, who say, I don't think Social Security is going to be there for me. They're wrong. It is going to be there for them. But the head of the Social Security Administration has correctly said it's going to be there in a substantially reduced amount. That's a given. We're either going to have your kids are going to have a big tax increase, I think unsustainable by at least the forecast growth in productivity, or you're going to have some kind of reduction in benefits out there in the future. So, I don't think we should have a promise to American people when it comes to Social Security that we can't keep. And before, back in the good old days when it was a pay-as-you-go system, that wasn't a problem. Today, it is a tremendous problem. Problem number two. This is very difficult because it sort of unmasks we politicians that like to talk about investing in our future. I challenge you to find any Republican, independent Democrat that doesn't consider that to be one of their favorite lines, always guaranteed to get a round of applause. If you do it right, you can even get a standing ovation. You know, invest in the future. Geez, I'm for you, Bob. That's exactly what I want to do. I want to invest in the future. The trouble is we aren't. You can see it dramatically when you look at these two big middle-class entitlement programs. Here's another little myth. You have people say, well, we're taxing at a higher rate than we've ever taxed before. It's total, unadulterated, as we'd say in the Midwest, horse manure. That isn't true. The amount of money that we take from the federal government takes in the form of taxes is about 19% of the gross domestic product today. That's what it's been for the last 60 years, except for World War II and a little spike when we wanted guns and butter during the Vietnam War. Other than that, we've been taking about 19%. The problem isn't how much we're taking. The problem is a mix of spending. And here's where anybody that gets up and says invest in the future has to be sort of called on the carpet, because we're not. 35 years ago, 70% of the federal budget went for appropriations, defense and non-defense, went for things like education, transportation, research, those sorts of things that are future investments, no short-term payoff. If I put money in education, I get no short-term payoff. It's long-term payoff is what you get. I build a road, long-term. Research, long-term. These are all long-term investments, nothing I can put on my campaign brochure, because nobody's going to be able to buy anything with it right away. It's a long-term investment. 70% of the federal budget. Today it's about 33%, and it's heading to zero. Heading to zero. Current trends unsustained. There will be nothing left to appropriate. No defense, and maybe that's popular in Cambridge, I don't know, but there won't be any research. Forget MIT, forget Harvard, forget law enforcement, forget education, forget the courts, forget everything. The entire federal government in 2013 will be converted into an ATM machine. We send money there, they transfer it back out. That's all it will be. And that is not, folks, an endowment society. That's not investing in a future. That's just coming and saying, how much is in it for me right now? I want to get my deal covered. I don't really care about what happens tomorrow. It is an unsustainable trend. At least I hope it's unsustainable. Third area, and this is very difficult. This is back to my Moynihan story. A very difficult thing to talk about without people saying, oh, God, he's really bashing seniors. I'm not. But it's a fact. This is a fact. In the state of Nebraska and Massachusetts, I do not have the numbers from memory because I do not represent Massachusetts. I had the numbers from memory in Nebraska. In Nebraska, there are 200,000 people over the age of 65. There are 330,000 school children, K through 12, excuse me, 330,000 school children. We spend $1.6 billion on the school kids, and we spend $3.2 billion on people over the age of 65, tax money. We spend $50 million more on the kids year to year and $450 million more on people over the age of 65. And again, we get a lot for that. And indeed, if you look at polling data, people really do not want to cut programs to their parents. I mean, they do not want to cut it. But you can't sustain that kind of differential ad infinitum. In my judgment, we are today squandering millions of lives who aren't getting an adequate education, who aren't getting the kind of support that they need outside of the school. We're squandering their lives and squandering the potential that God has given each one of them. And again, I would use myself as an example. In 1965, in December of that year, I got a letter in the mail. I was practicing pharmacy in Sioux City, Iowa at Toller Drug. I get a letter in the mail from all of you. It's from the taxpayers of this great country, and they said, guess what? You just qualified for a free physical examination. So you got a report next Saturday to Omaha, Nebraska. I go down there, and guess what? I passed. And guess what? That meant that I was entitled to join the Army. And I didn't. I joined the Navy. Spent 3 years in the world's largest, most powerful Navy. Volunteered for underwater demolition program, volunteered for SEAL team program, went to Army Ranger School, went to Army Airborne School, in every single case a government program. In every one of those programs, I had an instructor who made me do something I thought was impossible, who raised the goalposts, who said, you can jump higher, you can run faster, you can do more than you ever thought possible. And it's what our kids are missing today. They're not being challenged sufficiently. They're not being told that they can do more. And let me put one last sort of piece in this thing having to do with a big welfare debate. Since 1969, the taxpayers of this country have given me a military retirement check. It was $600 in 1969. It's gone up considerably since the COLAs have been in place in the 1970s. I haven't had a single illegitimate child. I don't sit around on my butt all day long and say the government owes me something. My sights were set high by my parents, by my drill sergeant, by people who taught me that I could do more than I ever thought it was possible. So, you give me $600, you give me $6,000, I'm going to go out and get a job and I'm going to work because I believe in myself. I believe I can do more as a consequence of this experience and that I had as a result of your generosity in sending me to the United States Navy. So I say that at the tail end of this because I want to assure you that I don't believe that as a percent of our total income or a percent of our economy, we're spending too much on our parents. I believe the problem is we're spending too little on our kids. And I hear people say, well, the government shouldn't do that. We spend $250,000 per person at Annapolis and at West Point and out in Colorado Springs, produce the best military officers that money in the world can buy. $250,000. Nobody says, well, can't you do it for $6,000? Can't you do it for $4,000? Can't I cut the spend? When it comes time to training people and preparing them to be the best, you've got to get the best to do it. And I don't believe in this country, in this land of the free and the home of the brave, that we're doing it. Anyway, I will stop at this stage. I was told to talk for, I forget how long? That's perfect. David says perfect. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Bob will respond first and then questions.
Oh, I see. Fine.
My apologies.
Oh.
You can have a seat. Thank you very, very much, and I apologize here for the confusion. As a response, we're going to have Bob Blendon speak. One of the really nice things about coming back to Harvard after having been away for a while is getting to know Bob better. You know, when you go away from, go spend some time in Washington, you begin to wonder where the real world is, since it's not here and it's not there. But when you come back, you have a different sense of appreciation for many of the people you left, and some you admire more and some you admire less. One of the people whose views and ideas and so forth I discovered I needed much more of and needed to understand much more of is Bob Blendon's. Bob is a professor of health policy and political analysis, both at the School of Public Health and the Kennedy School here. He's done a wide variety of things. He was the vice president, senior vice president at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and he serves on all kinds of various committees and boards and so forth. He got his degree in business, which is obviously why he's been in academia his whole life. Not true. We were at Robert Wood Johnson a long time, and so it proves that you can turn out well. Bob has spent a great deal of his life looking at everything from polls to the various issues in health policy. He was director or the chairman of the Department of Health Policy and Management at the Harvard School of Public Health. So if you would welcome Bob Blendon for a response.
Hi, Bob Blendon. It is a privilege to appear with a senator, and also it's a very odd role. I've been asked to sort of lay out the minefield that he's been the first leaping through, and to make sure that everybody here understands the courage of looking at the Medicare Social Security issue, and also looking at the age of many here. Your careers will be wrapped up with this issue and this debate for many times. So what I want to do is sort of lay out the minefield from someone who has a tenured job and has some protection here. The work I do is to look in depth at American voter attitudes and public opinion. And what I'm going to summarize very quickly for you are 12 surveys done in the last 2 years on this issue, and a look at what voters said on the way out of the exit polls. And I'm going to divide my remarks very simply into 3 sides, looking at the long-term issue of the entitlements, the current budget deficit debate, and a little bit about the political implications of this and whether or not you should care about what voters and the public think in the future. Quickly, let me deal with how average Americans think about this problem. To your surprise, actually, they know the future, but they're quite unwilling to face it. If you're at a health school, it's called denial clinically. How does this work out? It works out that 7 out of 10 people tell us that they believe that these programs will start running out of money in 15 years. And when you ask them what they think is going to happen, and it's very important not to use very unsophisticated polling questions like 80% think it won't be there, I'm losing faith in America. Americans are losing faith in everything. When you ask them specifically what is going to happen in the future, they're exactly like the head of Social Security said. They believe that what we'll have is less benefits, higher taxes, but not dramatically, and only 20 to 30% think these programs are going to disappear. They do not believe at any age that these programs are going to disappear. They think their benefits are going to be left. Well, given that I just told you that people know we're going to run out of money, they know what the future looks like, you'll be excited to know they don't want to take one step forward towards that future. They oppose either reducing the benefits or raising the taxes. Now, why is that? Why is so many sensible, practical people in denial? And I think that's important for you to understand this. First is, and the senator hit this, that 60% of Americans think this isn't yet a crisis, which means they can wait longer to deal with something that's very unpleasant. 40% do, but 6 out of 10 just say, further, later down the line. But the 2 most important things to understand is that there are 2 groups who underlie the current denial. The first is 85% of people, which means that all age groups, believe that these benefits are absolutely essential for everybody except wealthy people. Now, I want to be very key here because everybody goes back to the Rockefellers. Most Americans know that most recipients are not Rockefellers. They do not believe that the Rockefellers need the benefits, but for everyone else, they think they're absolutely essential. This cuts across all age groups. Secondly, and this is something that's not talked about, which is the problem that people under the age of 65 are insecure that they're not saving enough for their retirement. So this is the problem of one-tiered questions. We ask only about Social Security. Turns out if you ask people under 65, are you concerned that you're not saving enough for your retirement? 77% of people say, I'm not saving enough for my retirement. To be exact, 1/3 of people over 65 are saving nothing for their retirement. The 2/3 who are tell you that they're saving half of what they would think they need to retire. So what you have among under 65 working adults is an insecurity that they're not putting enough aside, that they're going to be able to substitute for Social Security or Medicare being reduced. And when you ask them, why aren't you saving enough, right or wrong, they say, I don't have enough money to save. So whether or not that's true or not, they perceive it. So the reason why the support is so strong, there are two groups. I think everybody but the Rockefellers need this benefit. And then I would like to have my private savings substitute for Social Security and Medicare, but I'm not saving enough. And if I eliminate the benefit, what happens if I don't save? So what you have are two groups, the insecure, not saving enough, and the people who actually, except for the very wealthy, think that the benefits are absolutely essential. So that leaves you with people telling you they know what the future is, they know there's a problem, but they're against either broad-based tax increases because I just told you that they don't have enough money to save, how do they have enough money to pay tax increases, and of course against broad-based reductions. Now I want to switch for a second to the deficit issue, and the senator may disagree with me over this. The deficit issue turned out in my mind to be the worst case for addressing the Medicare Social Security problem relating to this. And it has to do with the fact that your average American does not believe that Medicare and Social Security should be altered because we have a deficit. 85% oppose it for Social Security, 75% for Medicare. Now this is historic because at one time it was separate. And also it has to do with the fact, and I know we have an audience here that may disagree, and this is an extraordinarily difficult thing to say. When you give Americans a list of all the programs the government does, there are two that stand by themselves. They are so popular that people would almost eliminate the rest of the government. They are Medicare and Social Security. Every time you run anything else the government does against them, people say if we have to make sacrifices, the other programs will go. So you have the fact that this is not legitimate. People believe that these programs are special, should not be in the deficit, that some political ploy is put on them, with the second, that if we have a deficit, eliminate everything else. The senator mentioned that, but there's a list and it goes something like this. People would rather see defense, arts, food stamps, aid to farmers gone, aid to welfare gone, NPR, the tax income credit, I think there are about 7 others, dramatically reduced rather than having Medicare or Social Security touched. So if you're going to have a budget debate, what you suffer from the fact is that to citizens, if there's anything left standing, it's these two programs. So, and what's happened in the debate was we've shifted from discussing the fact that we're getting older, we're not going to have many workers and an awful lot of retirees, to the fact that an awful lot of citizens believe that the government and politicians are taking advantage of them by making them use Medicare and Social Security to balance a budget. And they don't think that's fair, they don't think it's right, and they've stopped thinking about the longer term issue. They feel so strongly about this, and Bob Teeter, who's the leading Republican pollster and Post for Wall Street Journal, called and he said this was one of the most confusing things he had ever dealt with. People told him they wanted a balanced budget at any cost. They want it written into the Constitution, but it could not affect Medicare and Social Security. God is not good to us in this debate in that there are certain pieces of information that are not well known. First is your average citizen believes that welfare and foreign aid is larger than Social Security, is larger than Medicare. So given the fact that you may not like those two programs, it's easy for people to say, find it on the other side of the house because they believe there's such budgetary problems. I want to deal with the political implications. I have students and people who come and advise me and they say, Bob, why I'm in public life, why do I have to pay attention to these people? Let's get on with this problem. Let us be leaders. And this is the problem of this issue. And quickly, the statistics politically. 22% of America are beneficiaries of the program. 61% of America says they have an immediate family member or close friend who gets a benefit. What I want to alert you to, those who do demographic analyses, that retirees have children. And you'd be amazed how the children identify with the retiree as distinct with the generation gap or the end of the civilization of the federal budget. So what happens is people, particularly in their 40s and 50s, identify very much with the retiree problem. Now again, who cares? Well, it turns out when you ask people, if you were to hear that Social Security benefits were reduced, 40% say that they would write their congressman to protest. Quick statistic, that's 70 million letters. Let's assume that actually the senators write, people don't get up. Only 20% of 15 million write letters. You have a response by people who wouldn't do anything in the political system, are very inactive on an issue that there's no other issue, that they would respond this way because they feel so strongly. Likewise, 40% of adults say that they would vote against the congressman if they really thought there were significant major reductions on Medicare and Social Security. So let me close and then with a couple recommendations of just caution but hope here. Is this real? Does it really show up? Well, the thing I want to alert you to, that the #2 voting issue in the '96 election was called Medicare Social Security. That's what the exit poll showed. And the states of Arizona and Florida, which normally did not vote in the president's camp, and in Arizona, I believe it's 1948, the last time they did, disproportionate retirees, disproportionate vote. So it's absolutely clear that the anger, the uncertainty translates itself in the political process. Just quick 3 recommendations. One, I hope the Congress can get through the budget balancing without having a backlash, because if people really get up in arms over just balancing the budget, we'll never get the long-term issue on the agenda. And then secondly, for those of you in public life, there's softer ways of solving this problem. There is an agreement that upper income people's benefits should be reduced. There's some sense that the providers can be paid so much less. There are things which do not polarize the national community. And then there are changes which actually will lead to millions of letters. So my note of caution is we can really move on this if people are very careful. And one other thing which has to be done, that is we need an incentive for people to save. As long as adults can report that they have no savings for retirement, they are going to be as big a stumbling block as retirees for change. We've got to change the incentives so you don't have so many people telling you that they have nothing going in the savings for retirement. Thank you. That's your minefield. It's your career. This is going to be just a long time.
Thank you, Bob. We have some time for questions for the senator. If you would line up either here or here. Let me just say a couple things. This is a time for questions, not speeches. And second of all, if you would identify yourself before you ask a question. Any questions?
Go ahead. My name is Adam Feuerstein. I'm a student at the Kennedy School and the Law School. And I was curious if you had any sense as to when do you believe the Social Security issue will actually be debated in a way that it'll actually come to the floor, a plan will come up. Is this something that's going to be within the next, probably not in the next Congress, but is something that will be in the next decade? Or will it be something that will be waited like Medicare until 5 years before? I know what you'd like, but what do you think will happen?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, again, Social Security is not in a crisis. There's no cash flow crisis, and so there's no real need short term. And I mean, the beneficiaries, the checks to the beneficiaries are substantially less, about $65 billion, I think, this year, less than what is coming in the way of income. So there's no short-term problem. The problem, though, is that I see with Social Security is that the program is designed for both the political and the economic, particularly economic needs, and the workplace needs of 1935, and they've changed dramatically. There are pressures coming because of demographics. 77 million baby boomers. You can't change that. I mean, Ronald Reagan didn't cause that. Bill Clinton didn't cause that. I mean, you got 77 million people, largest generation in the history of this country, coming online, 2008, 2011, depending on when you mark the beginning of that generation. Because of the size of that generation, out there in those years, you're forced to consider, as Ronald Reagan, Bob Dole, and others who did it in 1983, they changed it in 1983, forced to move the eligibility age back. not the retirement age. You can retire anytime you want to, but if you depend upon that income, that may determine when you retire. So they're forced to move it back. But what's coming in the other direction, people want to retire earlier. I mean, more people today are taking early eligibility at 62 for a whole range of reasons. So they want to retire earlier and they're living longer. I mean, so you've got this terrible actuarial problem that I think argues for changing the program so that instead of being a collective payment only, I mean, I would preserve the collective payment. Instead of being a collective payment only, at least a piece of it is a savings program that the individual owns, at least a piece of it. Simpson and I recommended 2%. Lieberman and I recommended actually opening up an account for children so they could take advantage of compounding interest rate earlier. You could put a $1,000 savings account, open a $1,000 savings account for 1/10 of 1% of the payroll tax and not have to, families wouldn't have to save anymore. Just use the current tax, 12%, by the way, in order to provide them the basis to save. We took 2% and said let the individual own it. There are three big advantages of that. One is it is savings. You own it. It's yours. It's not a collective pool. It's yours, and you can do, you can put a lien on it if you want. I mean, there's all sorts of things you can do. Secondly, a higher rate of return. I mean, even if you just say we're going to dictate that it goes in the S&P 500s, it's going to outperform non-negotiable Treasury bonds, which is what you currently have. Third thing is it's more flexible. If you want to convert it at 59, you can even change the law and let it convert earlier. You're not subject to Congress dictating, as a result of demographics, that you wait longer and longer and longer, which is going to happen. It's already written in the law that it goes back to 67. So there's no short-term crisis to do that. But one of the hardest things in life is to realize that you've got an opportunity, but it's too late to seize it. And boy, when it comes to savings, I mean, you can go jog, you can do high colonics, you can eat right, whatever it is you want to do and get healthy. You don't get those years back. And for those, I've got a lot of liberal friends who think I'm trying to destroy Social Security. I mean, I just urge you to go and read, I think it was November 13th or so in the New York Times, an interview and story on a woman by the name of Osceola McCarty, a washerwoman from Hattiesburg, Mississippi. She had a very small amount of money over a very long period of time, and it takes that long period of time of saving. So the longer we wait, the more we're denying people at the lower end of the income spectrum who need the help the most, who are struggling to save money. No matter what I do with the tax code, if I'm making under $25,000 a year, it's tough, or even slightly more than that. It's tough to save money. So what we're saying is take the existing payroll tax and use it as a way for individuals to accumulate wealth.
Thank you.
Senator.
Yes, sir.
My name is Paul. I'm a freshman here at Harvard. And,
I could have guessed.
To be honest, I'm pretty concerned about the state of entitlements in this country, and I follow it. And really, a lot of my concern stems from the fact that I'm a freshman. There are a lot of people, a lot of young people within, say, five years of my age, a big body of young people in this country. And there's also a big body of retired people. And my concern is that the lobbying power of those retired people, especially in the form of the AARP, is so much greater, so much more powerful, and so much more focused than my lobbying power could ever be, that in the end, those lobbyists dictate policy to Washington in a completely lopsided and unfair way.
Get out there and change that, for God's sake. Well, but, I mean, first of all, as powerful as the AARP is, and there's no question that they're quite powerful, they're powerful for a reason. I mean, people like myself have spent time in households with men and women who are in their 70s or 80s who are terrified about their future. I mean, they're really terrified. I mean, they got no more earning power. They get bills up the wazoo. They don't know if they can pay for their rent. I mean, everything is going, the life is scary when you're wondering if is the next bill going to be the one that's going to not break me because I'm already broke. Is it going to break my kids? I mean, that's what's going on. So with respect to the AARP, they are quite powerful, but I think they're powerful for a reason. I think there really is I talk to I have a lot of friends today who before they ask me any other thing, they'll say to me, what am I getting for all my taxes? And I say, well, one of the things you get is you get an opportunity to live in a country where you know that people over this age of 65 have health insurance. That's a big deal. To know with certainty that's there, but know with certainty they may not have enough from Social Security to pay all the bills, but at least they got something. I mean, Just like people over the age of 65 ought to know that we have Pell Grants, ought to know that we're investing enough in education, that we're not underfunding Title I, which we are, that we're not underfunding programs out there and closing the door of opportunity on people because they haven't got the money and resources to be able to go to the University of Nebraska, for God's sakes, let alone Harvard. I mean, to go to UNL now, you've got to take a second mortgage out in your home if you're middle class. So, I mean, it seems to me that you don't have to look at AARP and see that they're the enemy. They are very effective in lobbying, but I think they're effective not because they've got numbers, but because people in general say, I want to live in a country where, you know, once you get to be 65, there are some things you're not going to have to live in fear of. Anyway, I mean, I'm saying that as somebody that says to people over the age of 65, you're not the problem. I mean, the simple way of describing the problem is that my generation did not have as many children as our parents thought we were going to have. There's enough people in the workforce right now to support my parents' generation. That's no problem. But as the number of workers per retiree drops down, that's changing. And it's particularly going to be very, very difficult on baby boomers. I mean, that's the problem. It's not the current generation. Although I think Bob's quite right. I think people are willing to say, you know, at some income level, you ought to be able to adjust the benefits according to your income without putting anybody in an undue hardship.
My name is Tim Kiefer, and I'm a student at the law school. I'd like to know what your opinion is on the Concord Coalition's plan to reduce entitlement spending. I
haven't read it. I bet it's good, though. I know Paul Tsongas, like him a lot, and Warren Rudman like him a lot, and I don't know all the details in that proposal at all, but I like a lot of the things that they've supported. And Alan Simpson and I were recognized the other evening in New York City for our proposal, so my guess is that there's substantial overlap. I mean, again, to be clear on this thing, I don't see Medicare and Social Security as just budget problems. I mean, the Medicare program reduced the number of uninsured Americans over the age of 65. And I've got a lot of Americans out there who are working. We have a lot of Americans out there right now who are working, who don't have insurance and can't pay the bills. And the number's growing. If it was static, you'd say, fine, you know, it's at 40 million, leave it at 40 million, but it's growing at 1.5 million or so a year. Same way in retirement. I mean, the question really isn't just how do you save some money here? The question is how do you reorganize these programs so they do a better job than they have in the past? And so, I mean, I don't know if Concord does it. I think Concord typically has gone after this thing as a long-term deficit problem, as a long-term funding problem.
Hi, I'm Chris Brown. I'm a student here, an MPA student here at the Kennedy School. I guess I'm the reminder here of a part of your biography that was not mentioned. I was a delegate for your presidential campaign in New York back in 1992.
You don't look foolish. Go ahead.
Doesn't show, I guess. I guess my question was about the issue. It's only tangentially related to what you're speaking about tonight. Obviously, is what's inspired a lot of us who worked on your campaign in '92 was your call for universal, affordable health care. And it was an inspiration back then. It helped put it on the national agenda for a couple of years. Unfortunately, that didn't pan out. I guess my question to you is, what happens next there? I mean, if we're dealing with Medicare and Social Security, and we're going to deal with that soon, does health care get put on the back burner? Does it ever come back to the front burner? At what point does 37 million people being uninsured, constitute a crisis that demands federal action?
Let me answer with an experience. I learned when I was training in SEAL team to climb vertical rocks. I don't know if there's any other kind, actually, come to think of it. Never seen a horizontal rock. Anyway, to climb vertical faces, you know. And one of the things that you have to learn to do is a counterintuitive move. You know, you start to lose your balance, and everything inside of you says, get close to the rock. But you don't. You move away from it. In order to produce the weight and the pressure on the point of your toe and so on, or whatever the heck. I don't know what it is. But anyway, you're supposed to move away. The same is true in my judgment with Medicare. I mean, it wouldn't seem intuitively like expanding the entitlement is the right thing to do. I think it is. I mean, I would rather say, look, if the law reduced the rates of uninsured from 50% to 0, and I don't have very many people, left or right, think that was a bad idea. They get in real serious trouble if they do. And, and even those who do, I say, well, again, as I said earlier, you know, we've got all the kidneys in America covered, so, you know, anyway, a law reduced them from 50 to 0. If you're poor, you're covered too under Medicaid, so that one's covered. If you get blown up in a war, you get that one. If you work for the right employer, that one's covered. Why not just say if you're an American or legal resident, you're in? Now, what that forces you to do then is say, okay, how are you going to pay for it? And again, I would prefer to have the market. I prefer to have market forces with price and quality out there determining what people buy. Right now, we got mostly price, not enough quality evaluation as possible in healthcare. But if we want something, we got to pay for it. One of the most effective campaign ads against any healthcare reform in 1994 was, if you think healthcare is expensive now, well, it's free. And it's true. I mean, whether it's $10,000 shoulder or $20,000 heart transplant, whatever it is, it's expensive. And unfortunately, we like to get something and have somebody else pay for it. And whether you socialize it with insurance or socialize it with Medicare or socialize it through the VA or whatever, if you haven't got the money to pay for it and some third-party payer is going to pay for it, you're asking somebody else to pick up the tab, which is fine. Let's just go ahead and do that. But we ought to all face the true cost. And we ought to know where the subsidies are flowing, and let's not subsidize people that don't need it. I mean, I would vote for changing the law that had me pay full tab right now for my medical care. I can afford it. I appreciate, you all want to give it to me, that's fine. I don't need it. I needed it 20 years ago, and I may need it 20 years from now, but I don't need it right now. My income can take care of it. So, I mean, I think your intuition tells you what you need to do is restrict the entitlement. My own belief is, particularly if you change the law for universal eligibility, with all of us having to face the true cost of health care and paying according to our capacity to pay, all of a sudden, it seems to me, I think Americans, all of us are going to have an interest in doing the right thing when it not only comes to controlling costs, but in making sure that we're getting the quality care that we want. Thank you.
I'm Ned Tebbets. I'm a recent graduate of the Kennedy School, and I have a question about the government deficit. In particular, there are pending potential constitutional amendments on this subject. Mm-hmm. We see in the press a talk about a current deficit of $130 billion of that order of magnitude, and yet the Social Security program currently is producing an excess of income over expenditures of $70 billion. Why wouldn't it be more proper to define the government deficit as $200 billion and get the Social Security numbers out of the government deficit?
I don't know. Money's money. I mean, it's for ideological reasons or political reasons, we draw a line between one pot of money and the other. I mean, the hard fact is, in order to have any money at all, I got to have people working, generating, producing goods and services and selling them and all the rest of it. And I got to have a healthy economy in order to do it. And right now, one of the problems with the deficit is the economy's rolling around pretty good. I mean, back in the 80s when I was governor, the common statement was these $300 billion deficits are producing inflation and slowing the economy. Well, now, God, the economy's rocking and rolling out there. I mean, if Greenspan had keep his mouth shut and let the interest rates go down a little bit. I mean, but so I mean, you can separate the money, but I'm taxing people to generate it. I got a 12% tax on for Social Security and 3.4 for Medicare. For employer employee, and I got to have people out there working in order to be able to generate the money. So it's a total tax that it seems to me is the important one. And your point, if I heard you correct, your point is quite right. Social Security does not contribute to the deficit problem. It actually reduces the total real deficit if you measure all income and outgo. Now, did I wander around your question and avoid answering it? Or yes. That's what I wanted to do. Got that done. Oh, sorry.
Hi, my name is Stephen Morano. You mentioned two things. You mentioned broad-based tax or reducing the benefits a lot. Neither of those things are really going to happen. If a broad-based tax happens, people are going to be very angry. Reducing benefits a lot for an aging population is not going to happen. So the solution is very obvious, but politicians don't want to face the truth. In 1960, the amount of tax revenue into the federal government from corporations was 40% of our tax revenue. And income taxes were 10%. Now in 1996, corporations are not paying 40% of our tax revenues, they're paying 9%. And our income tax in proportion of percentage of tax revenues to the federal government have gone from 10% to 49%. Then we have the sales tax, excise tax. So big business, multinational corporations are not paying morally, not paying the amount they should morally, the correct amount. They're not paying enough, okay? The other thing is, besides, we should raise taxes on the large multinational corporations, the large, not the small businesses, not medium-sized businesses, but these huge trusts, these multinational corporations, raise it across the board so they're all equal in terms of competition, raise the tax to the 1960 level. Besides that, corporate subsidies, our taxpayer money, about $150 billion a year. Our deficit's only $116 billion a year. So, end corporate subsidies. If we get the money from big business in terms of what they should be paying in terms of taxes and stop corporate subsidies and reduce our defense, the money we spend on defense, we don't need troops all over the world and $250 or $260 billion deficit. If we do that, we're not broke. We're broke because the rich and powerful are not paying their fair share.
Okay. Thanks.
No comments?
Oh, I didn't hear like one of them yes or no things in there. I'm kind of looking for that.
As a politician, I'd like to have a little courage and make some comments.
Well, I mean, I don't know about this courage thing. I mean, look, you've asked me specifically, do I think we should raise the corporate rate on which
Yeah, indirectly I was asking.
which corporations? General Motors?
Yes, all the big, huge.
United Auto Workers oppose that. I mean, the trouble is people work for corporations. I mean, that's the trouble. I mean, this isn't coming from politicians or weak knee. This is coming from employees who are worried about the impact on their job. As far as subsidies, you're quite right. I mean, we do have, it is one of the areas of the Entitlement Commission that doesn't get a lot of press, but there is tremendous growth in the tax entitlement side of the ledger. No, I mean, there's no question that that's true, and I have voted on many occasions to reduce those entitlements. I mean, but I mean, I don't think it's just a question of people saying that, or politicians saying, we don't want to tax corporations anymore. I do think it's a question of employees being concerned about what that level of taxation is. Corporate rates could be raised, if the American people say that, that's something we absolutely want to do.
Just a quick thing is that in 1960, corporations paid 40%, now
Yeah.
they're paying 9%. So I'm saying that in the firing people send jobs overseas,
I
I'm
think
saying
we ought to let
corporate
someone
rates
else have
the
a
corporate
chance here
rates
too.
can be
Thanks.
increased. That's all I'm saying. To what
Yeah.
they should be 1960.
Two more questions?
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with that, although I don't think that the failure to do it comes as a consequence of people saying that they're afraid to take on American corporations. It does get kind of confusing when you raise the cost of a business, the cost of doing business out there. I mean, there are people working for them, and they don't get very excited if as a consequence, there's a reduction in employment, a reduction of benefit that comes. Look, there's no doubt in my, no question that if I'm a large corporation, I got plenty of money to hire lobbyists and lawyers to work Congress. I got plenty of money to be able to take care of myself. There's a terrible story in the New York Times a couple of Sundays ago about very, very wealthy people who were paying 1% and 2% rates of taxation because they were doing sort of a thing through Wall Street, some sort of exchange program in order to pay no capital gains but be able to pull huge amounts. I mean, there's no question this thing, but particularly on the tax side, it can be rigged, or on the pension side and the health care, it can be rigged against people that don't have a lot in favor of people who do.
Good evening, Senator. My name is Barbara Martinez. I'm a freshman at the college, but you probably could tell that. I was just thinking about the recent Democratic victory in the presidential election, and also the victory, or the success of many members of Congress who are Democrats and ran and were reelected. It seems that that these Democratic victories were based largely on the voters' impressions that the Democrats will protect Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and other entitlement programs in the Congress. Do you think that the Democrats have a responsibility to do that? And how can we change and lessen the size of these programs and their cost while still retaining our promise to these voters?
Well, I have to be careful I don't do what I did the other gentleman, wander around not answer your question. But I mean, first of all, many Democrats got elected because of education and other sorts of issues. And whatever they got elected on, they ought to do. I mean, whether you're Republican or Democrat, you ought to do that. Secondly, for 12 years, when the Republicans controlled the White House and the Democrats controlled the Congress. Anytime a Democrat would say, hey, Mr. President, why don't you submit a balanced budget, the Republicans would say correctly, the President doesn't spend the money, the Congress does. And to my friends on the Republican side of the aisle who say, I don't want to do anything on Medicare because you guys were real mean to me in the election, I say, get over it. You won the election. You got the power. You got the Speaker. You got the Majority Leader. The Constitution says Congress spends the money. We have a Budget Impoundment Act that says you're the one that's responsible for it. So let's get going here. Tell us what, you know, you run the Budget Committee. You run the Finance Committee. Let's figure out what you think needs to be done. I think they will be joined, particularly those who have an interest in helping, and not only to fix the budget problem, but helping Americans out there who are struggling to pay the bills of health care, who are struggling to figure out their retirement, who are really, they are terrified. And you can, there is, it seems to me, the possibility, if we can put together a coalition of people who say, yes, I've got a budget problem, but I'm willing to acknowledge as well there's a lot of stuff out there. Unless you got a lot of dough, the market isn't going to take care of you. I think there is a possibility that we'll get a solution. Make us. What? You made a funny face there at the end, like you didn't.
Nothing.
All right.
This will have to be the last question.
Hi, my name is Harry Ostrander, and I'm not a freshman at the college. Number one, I haven't heard any comment on the cost of living adjustment proposal from last week, which seems to go a long way toward solving part of this problem in the long term. Number two, can't we solve the number of workers in this economy almost overnight if we want to by changing immigration policy anytime we want to? And number three, recipients of the participants in Medicare only pay about roughly 30% of the cost of the program. Why is that fair? I mean, why shouldn't higher income people pay higher premiums in the Medicare program? I guess that's...
Well, the last one I'd say they should. There's no question as well that immigration is putting downward pressure on wages and benefits. And what was your first one? I forgot.
The COLA proposal.
I think what they're talking about makes sense. Look, I think you ought to put a benefit out there that enables people to adjust to whatever cost of living increases there are. The formula shouldn't be adjusted just because I'm trying to save money. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, so if they've got a calculation, and you know, I've just started to work my way through the report that they submitted last week. If they've got a calculation that more honestly and fairly and accurately reflects cost of living, I mean, the COLA does not do that. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics says that. They said that we're not trying to estimate increases in cost of living. That's not what we're trying to calculate something entirely different. So if we're using that formula both on the standard deduction and on the benefit payout to provide people with the resources that they need in order to compensate for rises in the cost of living, and if they've got a formula that more adequately does that, I'll support it, because I think that's what it ought to do. We should not be adjusting it for reasons other than in order to enable people to take, you know, to purchase more than they otherwise would be able to. I say as well, I think the system could be even more progressive than it is. I mean, we've got about a seventh of people over the age of 65 who are living in poverty, and I mean, I would support making the system even more progressive than it is. I pay, before I got in the Senate, I made over $130,000 a year. I got $130,000. Everybody in the Senate and the House makes $130,000 or whatever the number is. But we only pay tax, Social Security tax, on $62,400. And after that, we don't. You know, it's a very interesting question as to whether or not we ought to take that cap off. You could reduce the payroll tax, and for people, one of the reasons that people are having trouble saving money is they're paying a ton in payroll tax. It is a very difficult tax for lower income people.
Medicare tax goes on every dollar now. Maybe the Social Security tax should be
That's
a
exactly
lower
right.
tax on every dollar.
No, that's exactly.
Be
It's
a fairer way, maybe.
Yeah. Well, and let it be noted that they took the cap off, and the money's not going into the Medicare Trust Fund.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you ILP and the Wiener Center for the sponsor. Thank you. Great job.